First of all, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And welcome to a very, very special EYC Environmental Lecture by Dr. Sylvia Earle on exploring and protecting the planet's blue heart. Now, I am Virginia Tippie, and I am the co-chair of the EYC Environmental Committee, along with John Butler. I'm also an oceanographer. And when I was a young, aspiring college student, I wanted to become a marine scientist. And my hero and role model was Dr. Sylvia Earle. Now, she had just led the first all-female team to live underwater for a whole entire week. It was 1970, and I thought that was so cool. I had just received my scuba certification, and I was ready to conquer the world. And Sylvia, she was not only setting dive records and doing the first life aboard for, or underwater rather, for a week with a team of women, but she also was a marine biologist that was working on all sorts of fascinating research and exploring all sorts of issues. I thought she was pretty damn cool, and she was my hero. Well, however, I really got to know Sylvia in the late 80s when I was the director of the National Ocean Service at NOAA. And Sylvia came in as our first female chief scientist. That's a big deal, in NOAA, be the chief scientist of NOAA. And Sylvia was there working on a whole array of issues. And we got to work on several exciting issues together, from oil spills. Exxon Valdez, minor little thing, happened in while we were aboard. And also, of course, the Persian Gulf spill. There's a range of different oil spills, lots of exciting other issues like marine protected areas and how we can really grow that program in the United States. And of course, it was also very exciting to me that we had this wonderful, brilliant woman helping us at NOAA make a difference. But Sylvia had to make a tough decision, and it was no surprise to me when she decided to leave the federal government. She felt that she could have a bigger impact on the oceans and on the environment by actually working from the outside rather than within the system. And oh my God, what an impact she had. Upon leaving NOAA, she went and started an organization, or rather, first of all, a company that's called Deep Ocean Exploration and Research. And that company builds mini subs and builds ROVs. And she really started to break frontiers in terms of all sorts of ROVs and operational equipment. And, I always was jealous of all the different toys she got to play with. But truly, what was really exciting was in 1995, she became the very first National Geographic Explorer in Residence. That's a big deal, guys. That means she goes all around the world and explores all these cool places, and she continues to do so today. And in fact, as we were just talking earlier, she's worked in the middle of a major book for National Geographic on the oceans. But that's been an exciting position to be the Explorer in Residence, and the very first one in the United States, or in the world. So that was pretty darn cool. But she got to lead many, many, many National Geographic expeditions and many other underwater expeditions through a variety of different programs. But in 2009, she received the TED Prize. Many of you are familiar with the TED Talks. And she received the prize and presented her wish. And her wish was to establish hope spots throughout the world's ocean, special areas that would be protected so that we would ensure a sustainable ocean. And what's really, I think, very compelling is not only did she make that wish, and her wonderful presentation. Go back and listen to it. It was 2009, right, Sylvia?
That's
And
right.
you gave that TED talk. It was very inspiring. But she decided she was going to take action. And she then established a wonderful alliance of more than 200 conservation organizations that are doing the major efforts to improve our oceans, to explore them, and to obviously protect them. And these organizations, this alliance is known as Mission Blue. And it's pretty impressive what Mission Blue has done. And we'll hear a little bit more through the stories I'm sure that Sylvia will be talking about. But I love that in her book, The World is Blue, How Our Fate and the Oceans Are One, Sylvia aptly says at the very opening sentence and intro to the book, without the blue, there could be no green and no life on earth. Without water, water is the key to life. And her quotes are, to me, memorable. And I often write them to just remind myself what my passion is. But Sylvia has been called her deepness by the New Yorker and the New York Times, living legend by the Library of Congress, and Time magazine named her their first hero of the planet. She's really making a difference, and she truly deserves all those accolades and many, many more. Please welcome my personal hero and a true friend of this blue planet, Dr. Sylvia Earle. Sylvia?
Thank you, Virginia. You left out my favorite title. When we were at NOAA, they called me the Sturgeon General.
Yeah, you're right. I did leave that one out. That I almost put it in. Yeah, so many wonderful titles.
Yeah, somebody has to speak for the fish, and
Mhm.
that
That was a good one.
still try to do exactly that. So it is really a privilege to share the screen with you, share time with you. We'll get back in the ocean again. I know it's coming. Some people refer to what we're going through right now as the anthropause, when people have kind of shut down and looked looked at the world in a different way. It shows that we can change when we have to change, and we can do it very quickly when we know that basically our life depends on it. And I think that's a great message for the few things I'm going to share with you now. We have known for a long time that we have to take care of the natural world because our life depends on it. But we've been kind of casual and complacent and slow to do what we know needs to be done in order to take care of the air, the water, the fabric of life that makes our existence possible on this little blue planet in a universe that's pretty unfriendly if you get beyond our atmosphere, or even high up in the sky, it's not very friendly, or deep in the sea. You have to respect what keeps us alive and do the best we can to keep it going. So, I'm going to actually share some images with you as I convey the messages I would like to do. And we're going to give this a try. I'm going to say share screen and punch the right button and hope that it all comes true. I think it will. Um, Screen sharing. No, oh my goodness. I can drive submarines, and I hope I can drive this little bit of. There we go. Can you see what I'm seeing?
We see you at the moment.
Okay. Well,
Let's be sure. We might need to have
We'll get there. Hmm. Um,
Okay. Do you have Dan? Can we help Sylvia in any way?
it was working when I
Yeah,
did
we did a dry run,
a wet run
wet run.
through
That's
the ocean. Here we go. I think that's it.
there. You're there.
Are we there?
You're there.
All right. Now you can see me and you can see all of the water in the world. That little blue speck on the face of the planet. This is an image that scientists at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution conjured up just to show that while the ocean seems enormous, seems so vast that nothing we could do could possibly hurt the ocean, but in fact, if you take all the water on the planet, including the fresh water in the clouds and all the water that's in all of us, and you put it in one little ball compared to the size of the planet as a whole, that's what keeps us alive. The water. No water, no life. As you say, Virginia, no blue, no green. I, as a kid, got knocked over by a wave. The ocean got my attention, and it's held my attention ever since. But that first image that I had up there, horseshoe crabs, some of you listening in are tuned in from Annapolis, from the Chesapeake Bay area. I'm a Jersey girl. I started out in the great Northeast and fell in love with horseshoe crabs. They are the creatures who lured me into the ocean. Virginia, you credited me for getting you to think seriously about some ocean issues, but horseshoe crabs I thought were just the coolest creatures on the planet when I first met them. And they still are. And it's a symbol to me of how something that's been around for 400 million years, and they're still around, but they may not survive this century because of us. Whether they do or don't really depends on what we choose to do or not do. It's a kind of a symbol for me of where we're at in terms of life going forward. And I am not able to get to, there we go. All right. I am mastering this system. So, as a kid, I wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to do what some of my heroes that I read about, William Beebe, going to sea, diving in submersibles, exploring the ocean. And I had a chance to do so back in the 1960s. And Virginia, you mentioned that I turned out to be the first woman to be the chief scientist at NOAA, but going to sea at all was kind of a big deal back in the 60s. So when I had a chance to go and to be the only woman with 70 men, that made headlines way back then, 1964. The Mombasa Daily Times, when we were exploring the Indian Ocean, had a headline, "Sylvia sails away with 70 men, but she expects no problems." Huh. I didn't have any problem with sailing away with 70 men. I asked the guys, if you had to sail away with 70 women, would that be a big problem? Probably not. The big problem we had was, how do you explore the ocean from the surface when the ocean, after all, is that body of water with an average depth of 2.5 miles, about the depth that the Titanic is resting on the seafloor, 4 kilometers down. Maximum depth 11 kilometers, 7 miles down. So if you really want to know the ocean, you got to go jump in. The world, in a word, is blue. So astronauts high in the sky have to take their life support system with them. When you go deep in the sea, same thing. You have to take air if you're going to stay for a while, as I had a chance to do, going back, again, as you pointed out, Virginia, in 1970, the Tektite project. It was actually 2 weeks that we got to stay underwater and explore day and night to get to see the ocean from the inside out instead of just from the top down. I know there are a number of sailors tuning in, and I love sailing too, but I always wanted to know what's under the boat. You know, it's great to be out there at the surface, but the action is beneath the surface. That's where most of life on Earth actually is. And when we were living underwater, yes, we had a nice warm, dry place to eat and sleep and look through microscopes and talk to people on the surface, but the real joy was getting out in the water. And we did that 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And I've actually done it now 10 times, living underwater, different habitats. This is the Hydrolab, but most recently, the Aquarius that NOAA supported for a number of years. But the last year that NOAA had support for the National Underwater Research Program was 2012. And that's when I last saturated, actually, with a team of well, in this case, all guys other than myself. And we actually had a chance to, yeah, with new technology, speak to people not just in the immediate vicinity, but there was a microwave link, and we could speak to the world from under the ocean, the way astronauts take for granted they can speak to the world from high in the sky. We were able to connect to people who were far away. I actually had a moment of zen for the Jon Stewart show from deep in the sea, thanks to all the wires and cables and microwave links and other things that have come along since 1970. We've learned so much, really, mostly in the last century. We've learned more about the ocean and why it matters to everyone, everywhere. New technologies that keep coming. You know, this is the greatest era of exploration right now, just beginning. I mean, we look back to the 1500s and 1600s and 1700s thinking, the great era of exploration 200 years ago when a Russian explorer for the first time glimpsed the Antarctic continent. But 500 years ago, the first circumnavigation of the world. These were great explorations. But literally, we are just beginning to gain access to the principal part of the planet where most of life on Earth actually exists. It's home for the greatest diversity and abundance of life on Earth. And again, I keep talking to you, Virginia, because you're right there. I can see you, and you started all this. You and I were at NOAA when John Canals, who's a great hero of mine, an oceanographer, was at University of Rhode Island as the dean for years, but emerged as the administrator of NOAA. But I remember him asking me once, he's a physical oceanographer. He said, Sylvia, is it possible that there's more life in the ocean than there is on the land? We're talking now 1990. And to think that we're still asking that question not that long ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we were still not as aware as we perhaps should have been about what now seems so obvious, that it's not just rocks and water. The ocean is alive. It's a minestrone. It's a living system. You pick up a cupful of water loaded with viruses, loaded with bacteria, and little creatures that make it more than just salt, hydrogen, and oxygen, and all the other stuff. Plus a lot of things we're now putting in the ocean that weren't there 500 or even 200 years ago, or even 50 years ago. We are changing the chemistry of the ocean through what we're putting into it and also what we're taking out of it. Getting down there into little submarines, using remotely operated systems, whatever it takes. For 5 years with National Geographic, working with NOAA as a partner, working with the Goldman Foundation in San Francisco, we had teachers, kids, scientists using little submarines to explore the coastline of this country, focusing on the part of NOAA that really caught my imagination. That was the National Marine Sanctuary Program. I know it was near and dear to you as well. Still is. It's the equivalent of national parks in the ocean. What a great idea. It's taking people time to catch up with a concept. We have to embrace the ocean with the same kind of care that we have accorded to life on the land. If we want to have old growth forests, we have to consciously and proactively protect them because people see values of different sorts. Trees can be translated to old growth. Old growth forests can be timber. They can be a place where you can clear the trees and plant people, houses and such. So, it's coming to understand the value of the living land, the value of the living ocean, and what we extract from it, that you don't put a dollar and cent sign on. You say it's our existence that we're protecting. So I do love little submarines. You pointed out that after I left NOAA, I started deep ocean exploration and research. Actually, before I went to NOAA, I was involved with working with engineers to design and develop little submarines and underwater robots. And when I left NOAA, I started a new venture that my daughter and son-in-law now own and operate, building submersibles and solving problems of ocean access. I mean, I just love being able to go deeper than I can go either holding my breath or using scuba. I mean, that takes scuba, you can go maybe 50 meters. That's great, but that's the skin of the ocean. To go really deep, we can send cameras, and we are. We can send robots. It's great. We need that. But there's no substitute for taking my mind, myself, my memory, my judgment, all the things that I think of as me, into the space that I want to be. Now, I love what's happening right now in some ways. We are embracing the virtual experiences and really fine-tuning the ways and means of transporting our mind. The remote operated systems are doing that. And now the astronauts up in the sky were able to share with us their view remotely, but giving us their perspective of what Earth looks like from space. Not everybody's going to get to go in space. Not everybody gets to go in little submarines. But being able to share the view, I really want everyone to get out there, down there, in little submarines. And I hope that within the next few years, we'll see an increasing number of people, not just scuba divers, but deep divers, using robots, but also getting themselves down into the sea to explore. I mean, it's really exciting stuff. So I'm embarked, working with my daughter and son-in-law, with a project called Deep Hope. We're trying to get 2 little submarines built as the first of what I hope will be many, to democratize access to the sea. So you can get 10-year-olds or 5-year-olds or 90-year-olds, CEOs, teachers, moms, dads, anybody, not just the privileged few who are either there for industry or there for science, but to actually be able to go and use this as a new way to understand and care for the ocean. Now, there was a little kid who grew up to be a scientist, a filmmaker, James Cameron, who built his own submarine. It took him about 5 years, and he used his own resources to do it, and then went to the deepest part of the sea. We have people who are looking at their own backyard, whether it's, as this image is, in South Africa, or my backyard here in California, the kelp forests, or out in the Sargasso Sea, which is a bit further east from where you are, Virginia. They are on the eastern coast, this vast blue part of the planet that has a golden forest of photosynthesizing taking place, capturing carbon, generating oxygen, providing home and sustenance for a wide range of creatures. We're just beginning to understand. We need to put this on the balance sheet when we're talking about climate, when we're talking about taking care of the systems that make life on Earth possible. We understand about the Amazon, about trees generally. We, we need to protect trees because they generate oxygen, capture carbon, maintain a planet that works in our favor. But they're also the forests in the ocean, this floating forest of sargassum that was really doing its part of the heavy lifting of maintaining the planet in our favor. Oops, there we go. But the little guys, the phytoplankton, prochlorococcus is a word you should learn because it's responsible for much of the oxygen that has been generated over hundreds of millions of years in the atmosphere that really makes our existence possible. Prochlorococcus, so tiny that people really did not know of its existence until a woman, Sally Chisholm, MIT scientist, with Woods Hole colleagues, found them in 1986 out in the Sargasso Sea. There where the sargassum exists, so were these little guys pumping out oxygen, capturing carbon, part of that which makes the climate favorable to humankind, along with diatoms and a host of other little things out in the ocean. As I say, it's a minestrone. This is a living system. Every time that you go swimming and you swallow a little bit of seawater, think about all the little critters that go down in the process. I mean, little sustenance along with the seawater. Oh, there's so many things out there, and they're so beautiful. We just are beginning to develop the technologies to see what makes the great ocean food webs possible, starting with sunlight, photosynthesis, the little guys that generate the little fish that feed the big fish and the birds and the dolphins. And you see it right now in action. This is the food. This is the carbon cycle in action. And the really important thing is to watch it without becoming a part of it. Anyway, fish. Now, I grew up in South Jersey as a kid and then moved to Florida, where eating life from the sea, we call it seafood, was just the ordinary natural thing to do. But that has changed a lot since I was a kid. Now, there are vessels that go far out to sea using factory trawlers and ships that take far more than was possible when I was a child. So it's no longer a matter of feeding communities, families. Now, ocean wildlife is being pursued relentlessly as products, and taking these carbon-based units, these are elements of what makes the climate function, the way trees do in a forest, fish do in the sea. They're part of the cycle of carbon, the cycle of life. I realize that we are on a learning curve right now. I certainly am, about looking at fish with a new perception. I used to think of them as delicious, lemon slices and butter, or anything that we took from the sea, clams and oysters and whatever. But in my lifetime, I've been a witness, as many of you who were listening have also witnessed, a change from when you could go out and catch a few fish to feed a few people, but now taking literally millions of tons of wild animals, the way we used to think of birds, to extract any number, to take them to market on a scale that was not sustainable. We lost, as a consequence, passenger pigeons. We lost Carolina parakeets. We diminished the birds, even the ducks and geese, which fortunately we didn't take them all. Ducks Unlimited started to recognize you have to protect breeding areas, feeding areas. You can't take them everywhere all the time in any numbers. We're getting there with respect to fish, but it's taking some time. And also to realize that fish have faces, fish have personality, fish have friends, if you will, associations, social structure, intelligence. Every fish, like every bird, every cat, every dog, is an individual. and you can recognize them as such, but we measure them by the ton. And we have allocations of fish the way we used to about whales. This is a whale shark, of course, the biggest fish in the sea, every one an individual, recognizable by the spots. And using NASA technology to map stars in the sky, people are now using that same computer technology to map the spots on every individual whale shark so you can tell who's who and track them as they move around in the ocean. So you can see that whale shark went from this place to that place, and if you take a photograph of them, you might be part of the tracking system, the way bird watchers watch birds, getting to know individuals. Like this is a cat that is part of my household. We get to know them as individuals. Okay, well, Virginia, where you are, Chesapeake Bay, has been a place where these little fish have been taken now as a source of revenue, a source of oil, a source of bait, fertilizer. These are menhaden. But I've come to see that every one of those little critters is an individual. We measure them by the ton. We're getting to the point where we're realizing that vacuuming fish out of the ocean, the way we used to think of whales just as products, okay, we'll still take fish from the sea, probably for as long as they're humans and fish. But we have to think differently about what they're worth and how many we can extract, and to think that we have to balance those that we take for food or those that we take for products, and maintain the major life in the sea, the major populations of fish, for what they contribute in terms of the carbon cycle, in terms of the social structure of the life in the sea, the food webs, the give and take of the nitrogen cycle. It's not just carbon, it's the nutrient cycle in the ocean as a whole. I attended the World Economic Forum in Davos earlier this year, and it was exciting to hear economists talking about whales as really vital components with a dollar sign that is not measured in terms of pounds of meat or barrels of oil, but rather their carbon value. You know, whales, like sharks, like tunas, like a lot of things, live a long time. And as they accumulate carbon, they keep it in place. And ultimately, when they go the way of all living things, they sink to the bottom of the ocean, and carbon gets stored in the deep sea over very long periods of time, until we came along in recent times, recent centuries, and took so many whales we came close to exterminating them. But Virginia, you and I have been witnesses to a time when, instead of celebrating the killing of whales, measuring them by the ton, we have seen and witnessed, as some of the listeners probably have as well, a turning point. 1986, the same year that Prochlorococcus was identified as a major lifter in terms of capturing carbon, a little microbe in the sea, actually a kind of bacterium that is generating oxygen, capturing carbon, driving food webs that actually power the whales in due course, and storing the carbon in the whales. So we're talking a very large number that economists have now begun to assign to whales for their carbon storage, carbon sequestration value. Far more important to keep whales alive than to take them out of the ocean and carve them up for pounds of meat or barrels of oil. You get one-time use for this much value, small value, versus the long-term value. We're not even talking about whale watching or tourism, which is now a multi-billion-dollar business. We're talking about the real value, the living value of living marine mammals to us. Even if you've never seen a whale, you should thank them. But while you're thanking the whales, why shouldn't we also be thanking other forms of life in the sea. Yes, we can measure their value dead, but when we go out to catch tuna, we're just thinking about their dead tuna value. You know, the reason they started calling me the Sturgeon General at NOAA was because I was invited to one of their tuna meetings, and I had to point out that tuna have an accounting base of 0 when they're in the ocean. A live tuna is worthless. It's free. It's only dead tuna, dead fish, that that we think of as valuable. And that's when they started calling me the Sturgeon General. Anyway, they didn't think it was a compliment, but I did. Anyway, dead sharks, same way. You can weigh them by the ton. You can put a price tag on them once, and then they're gone. And you've left a hole in the ocean. You haven't subtracted a value from your supply base, and you haven't accounted for their living value to the ecosystem. Well, you could put a value on entertainment of sharks, whatever your value. Shark fins should be a trivial contribution to the economy instead of something that drives them to close to extinction for some species. The oceanic whitetip shark is now thought to be 99% gone. Swordfish, we've watched them disappear as our appetite for them dead has increased. Their value alive has decreased. Their number today is a fraction of what it was when I was a kid. And although we have had some policies that have started some recovery of swordfish and marlin and the other high seas fish, they're nothing back like what they were just 50 years ago. So we have the capacity to think differently about what we take from the sea and how we take it. Now we're looking at other problems. Nobody really thought about what fishing nets in the ocean could do when they're abandoned or lost when I was a kid. But then the scale of fishing when we go back to when I was a child was so much less than what it is today. When you think about the thousands of fishing vessels and the nets and lines, thousands of miles of long lines, it's a wonder we have any fish left at all, given the number of fish that are being taken and the junk that goes into the ocean that did not exist, again, when I was a kid. As a witness, I'm coming to you now just to share the view of what's happened in such a short period of time. A time, even when I was a child, when things had already seriously declined. There were far fewer whales when I was a child than there were 200 years ago. But we have the capacity now to take out of the ocean, to put into the ocean things that are now really threatening the nature of nature. We have the evidence. That's the good news. Imagine if we did not know. Imagine if we did not have satellites up in the sky, or astronauts as witnesses, or those of us who go down into the ocean as witnesses, those of us who've been around for enough decades to be able to see and to dive back into time, to listen and read from those who did exist centuries ago about their perspective on what the world was like. Humans have that gift of knowing. Polar bears, they may realize that the world is changing in their lifetime, but they don't know why. And even if they did, they wouldn't know what to do about it. We know why, and we do know what to do about it. And Virginia mentioned in the introduction that the idea of embracing the ocean with care, protected areas, we have enough evidence now so that those who were skeptical about the idea that you could have areas that you could protect in the sea, like parks, the Marine Sanctuary Program, and now National Geographic has pristine seas as an objective area to embrace wild places. The high seas is our last best hope for real serious protection of the blue heart of the planet. Right now, deliberations about what to do with half of the world the high seas, that delivers most of the oxygen to the atmosphere, captures carbon from the atmosphere, holds most of life on Earth, that half of the world that is now the common property, if you will, the common opportunity, if you will. It's the, the high seas. Individual nations have responsibility within their own exclusive economic zones to take action. But we're all invested. We all have a vested interest in using whatever power we have. And we all have power, one sort or another. It's a matter of using whatever power we've got to say, we have to do whatever we can to protect the world that takes care of us. So with Mission Blue, we're trying to energize communities around the world. This is in South Africa, but we now have 131 places around the world, from the Gulf of Mexico, and just this past year launched the Florida Gulf Coast Hope Spot. We had a big celebration in my hometown there of Dunedin, Florida. People dressed up as critters to celebrate their caring about the ocean. It's a start. Celebrating and saying you care is just the beginning. You really have to take action. You have to listen to the sharks, even Shannon the shark, who speaks for them. And wherever in the world you are or have influence, here in Hong Kong, the Center for Wildlife Trade on the planet, one of the places where wildlife from the land and wildlife from the sea, shark fins, are traded relentlessly. But the kids are not buying it. They are on board for protecting what they now know that their parents, as 10 and 12-year-olds, did not know, and are having to learn along with the kids why the ocean matters, why life in the ocean matters, why, of course, there are creatures that are great to eat, but we can't eat them all. And right now, 90% of many of the big fish are already gone. How many more can the ocean afford to lose? Before, whether you like them alive or dead, there won't be an opportunity to make the choice. We have a chance now to make that choice. The kids are out there hauling in the discarded and lost nets. The kids are carrying the weight of picking up the trash. This is in the Seychelles, in the Indian Ocean. The last big trip that I took was in the Seychelles in February, before traveling to distant places became something that of the past and maybe of the future, but not right now. But I was so pleased at this Hope Spot, where the president of the Seychelles in the spring of 2020 announced embracing 40% of their exclusive economic zone as a protected area. Well, that leaves 60% open for fishing and all the other things that people take out of the ocean. But we have now globally a goal of 30% by 2030. That's all the nations of the world plus the high seas. If we could at least get to 30% of the world, that we safeguard the tuna, we safeguard the sharks, we safeguard the krill, we safeguard the prochlorococcus, we safeguard the ocean, we safeguard ourselves. It's our insurance policy by setting deliberately protective measures around the ocean that we say, you know, we care about plankton. Now here's a little kid who grew up to be the President of the United States. He is the one who was able to use his superpower as president to establish the Papahanaumokuakea Marine Reserve as the largest part of the ocean where even the fish were safe on his watch. Now it's about 10th because others have stepped up and begun to use their mighty powers, including President Obama, who similarly expanded the Papahanaumokuakea Marine Reserve. And here, in the little island country of Palau, the president happens to be a diver, used his power to say 80%. 80% of their exclusive economic zone to make up perhaps for some of the laggards who are saying, oh, well, we have 1%, we'll get there. He did 80% on his watch with the blessings of his people who see the benefits. More fish. More fish because the bank account, if you will, is largely intact. They're not carving out the capital and consuming it. They're saving that. And yes, they do take some fish, but they don't take them all. So, Virginia, and all of you who are listening, I say this is maybe the best time ever to be a human being, certainly to be a kid, because of what we now know that nobody could know when I was a child. We have power. We have power of taking what we now know, looking at the laws that are now in place, that were put in place, whatever, 50 years ago, 30 years ago, but now we know better. We can change those laws, and certainly we can change our habits that were born maybe of a social attitude of eating cod. It was the right thing to do at the time. Today, the number of cod have been so amazingly reduced. We ought to try to give them a break. Every cod counts. Now we know. We have to rethink, even though it's legal to take them, maybe we can just say, I personally am going to make a choice. That's where we are. And right now, I'm going to choose to stop so I can listen to any questions that might have come in. And really, I thank you for sharing the time in this beautiful day in September 2020. Imagine 2030, we've got 10 years to turn from where we are in this seemingly inexorable decline into recovery and something that will be better for all of the future based on what we do now. Thank you.
Well, thank you so very much, Sylvia. That was so inspiring. And I know everyone here on the call has really enjoyed your remarks. I've gotten several comments, but I did want to just remind everybody to please use the chat capability as you have questions, and Sylvia will answer those questions as best she can. I will convey the question to her because we're expecting several questions, but I do know that there's been a few that have come in to me, and I just want to be sure that we get those forwarded to you. First, I wanted to this is a bit of a comment, and I think also from Karen and Ben Grumbles. First of all, Ben just wanted to say he saluted you today during Climate Week in New York City. He was on a panel on ocean acidification and climate action. And just as a side, by the way, in our part of the world here in Maryland, we're real proud of Ben Grumbles as our Secretary of the Environment. He's doing a great job. And I know he wanted to say a salute to you today during Climate Week, because I think people don't realize the important connection between the oceans and climate. And they're growing, they're learning. I think people now recognize with the weather reports that there's things that's called El Nino and La Nina, and those ocean currents make a difference in whether we have a storm coming up, but in terms of weather and that connection. But the long range climate situation is of concern, and we want to salute you for everything you've done to bring attention to that as well.
So, Virginia, when we were at NOAA, that was a time when the whole idea that caused NOAA to be formed in the first place, getting the atmospheric scientists and the ocean scientists under one roof so that they would be forced to communicate and talk with one another. It was a strategic decision, and Bob White, who was the first administrator of NOAA, was part of the architect of that idea, and so was John Knaus, who was the administrator of NOAA on our watch. Mm-hmm. The idea that scientists tended to be siloed, you look at the atmosphere, or you look at the ocean, or you look at the land, but look behind me, look around you. Where do you draw the line? It's like this. Everything connects. And it's all connected to the fact that this is a living planet. This is not just rocks and water and plastic, of course.
Plastic, a lot of plastic in there. And we have another question here also from Alderman Rob Savage, and actually his son as well, who joined him. And they both, and particularly Rob's son, wanted to know how many submarines, how many submarines have you, let's see, let me get this right. How many submarines and have you designed and operated?
Well, I've had a chance to use more than 30 different kinds of submarines,
Mhm.
but the ones, and most of them, most of those uh, or about half of them, I guess, more than half, are one person subs. So you have to drive them if you're going to use them, like the little Deep Rover, or the
Mhm.
Deep Worker, or the Jim, or the Wasp, or the Mantis. They're built for one person. So you have to learn how to drive it if you're going to use them. But many of the subs are two-person or three-person, and some of the passenger subs now can take 30 people, like a bus. They don't go very deep, but they can take a lot of people. And it's really fun to see how people who've never been snorkeling, never been diving, but they can get in a submarine and see fish right there in the ocean doing their thing, not just on a plate, but live. And not just in an aquarium. You take yourself into the aquarium, into the big aquarium, the ocean. So the Deep Hope subs have been designed. We have the experience operating the Deep Rover and building the Deep Rover 1 and Deep Rover 2, one and two person subs. And, ah, you know, the thing is, the engineering is very straightforward. This is a time, like, we know how to build a car. There's a time when cars were really new and everybody was learning about this. We know how to build submarines. There are submarines now that can go to the deepest part of the ocean. It's not a mystery. If it wasn't just Jim Cameron, in 1960 was the first submarine to go to the deepest part of the ocean. And this past year, Victor Vescovo has not only taken himself, but he took Kathy Sullivan. He's taken visitors, he's taken scientists repeatedly down into the deepest part of the ocean. 10 years ago, we'd have thought that was impossible.
Yeah.
It's not only possible now, it's becoming routine. And I love it. The fact that we now can go not just 7 miles high in the sky, we can go 7 miles deep in the sea. There's no excuse anymore for saying we don't know. The only excuse is we haven't taken ourselves to find out yet. Let's go. Don't you want to go? Virginia, should we
I'm
go?
ready.
You ready?
Well, there is a related question that is how many dives have you done or how many hours underwater?
Thousands.
You lost count a long time ago. I tried to get a handle on how many uh, dives you've done, but it's impossible, I think.
No, I do keep records. It's over. Uh, you know, dives can be short or dives can be long. When you saturate, you're there for 24 hours a day, so you can stack up hours quite rapidly. And since I've done that 10 times for a week or 2 weeks at a time,
Mhm.
so I've got thousands of hours submerged
Wow.
and thousands of individual dives. Sometimes they're only 20 minutes. You know, the deeper you go on air, the shorter the time you have. So 20 minutes at 100 feet is a really good dive. But I'm greedy. I want to go 1,000 feet for hours. I want to stay overnight. I want to stay for weeks. We can do this. Just as we can, if we can put a space station up in the sky, they can stay up there for months, years. Why are we not having one atmosphere quarters to take ourselves into the ocean, use little submarines as taxis to go back and forth, I love diving and subjecting my body to pressure. It's okay, but we can only go so deep. We need 1 atmosphere submersibles of all sizes and shapes, although a sphere is the best shape to withstand pressure, but to go deep and use the knowledge that we now have to make it not not an exception, but just to say that's my means of transportation to go see what I need to see, to do what I need to do. Right now, only about 10% of the ocean has been
Yeah.
seen, let alone explored. Maybe less in terms of looking at the water column. How much you can, this much of the surface and this much of the bottom. Submarines tend to go straight down to the bottom, but it's that part in between that's the ocean. It's where the action is for the most part, and that's what we really need to go and explore.
Well, you got lots more questions here, so I'm going to keep rolling here.
Well,
We have a question from Elvia Thompson with Annapolis Green. In fact, she wants to know where your favorite place. What was your very favorite place to dive in?
it's always the next one,
So, that's a good answer.
and it's true.
Always somewhere. Well, related though to that, as given that you mentioned the concern about fish, her question was, what seafoods can we eat without risking to, the population? What seafood can we eat?
Eating wild animals is a choice, and for some people, in some places, in some countries, whether it's bushmeat from the forest or the equivalent from the sea, it's sustenance. It's really, but otherwise, for the most part, it's a choice. And I've made the journey, and I don't eat any wild animals anymore. I don't eat animals anymore. I used to, but I realize that there's so many other things to eat. They're really tasty. That's the trip. So people ask me, what's your favorite fish? I say, it's a live fish, not one on my plate. But I appreciate that we have this huge investment in restaurants and recipes and habits and culture and a lot of things. Um, Barton Seaver, who's a great uh, chef with his specialty is taking life from the sea. I call it sea life. He calls it seafood. And he does say, well, you should eat more broccoli, but he does cook a lot of animals that are taken from the sea, and he makes them delicious, but he also makes broccoli delicious. So just think about not just what you're eating, but whom you're eating, where did it come from. We're getting better at tracing where did a fish come from. When it's just carved up, you have no idea, but you should want to know, is this fish something that's taken 2 years to grow, like a cow, or is it taken 50 years, like a halibut? Might be a halibut can be younger, but they get to be as old as humans. And I think we need to leave the big old fish, the big fish, the ones we should really carefully protect and leave in the sea, because not only are they the ones who have the greatest experience, they also have the capacity to make more offspring. We don't eat 15-year-old cows, but we eat a lot of 15 and 20 and 30-year-old wild fish. But we're taking, a, sorry to say this, but we seek sustainable extraction of wildlife, and we're not succeeding. Not when we see on my watch the decline from where, in spite of efforts to be careful about how many fish we take, this is the trajectory. They're not leveling off or increasing. A few areas, small places where you can say, yes, we're, we're actually seeing a recovery, and that usually is because of a limited take in connection with protecting breeding areas and feeding areas. But generally speaking, looking at the world as a whole, going to the market, it's hard to know, where did this fish come from and how old is it? What has it been eating that I don't want to have in me? I'm not just talking about mercury, all those microplastics that ultimately get through the system and back to you. I think you're right to ask the question, and I can't really give you a straight answer except to say you should do your homework and you should be asking, where did this fish or crab or shrimp or clam or oyster come from? And in some cases, not just for your health or your conscience, but it's the right thing to do. Maybe the answer is, all right, I'm going to have oysters Rockefeller. I feel good about where this came from. Right now, there's this restoration project in New York, the Billion Oyster Project, and it's being mirrored in Chesapeake Bay, the Gulf of Mexico, in my backyard here in California, San Francisco, the Wild Oyster Project, putting oysters back in the ocean instead of taking them out, with a goal of having sufficient recovery so that maybe we can take some of them to market and enjoy the traditions that we've come to develop over the years. But meanwhile, you know, oysters do a great job of cleaning up the bay, cleaning up the ocean. They we ought to let them do their job.
Okay, well, we have several more questions. From Catherine Cronin. She is asking, Sylvia, the dead sargassum, which drifts over into the Caribbean Sea, has been a real blight for the folks in that region and their tourist industry.
Hmm.
What causes it?
Well, that's a big question mark. We don't have a straight answer, but there is concern that because of what we're putting into the ocean, that's, there are usually two species of sargassum that make up the Sargasso Sea, and they're not those seaweeds that are ever attached. They're always drifting. The Sargasso Sea is a miracle. It's where, in this gyre, this slow moving giant whirlpool, if you will, over more than 1,000 miles, this moving between the Gulf Stream on one side, and it's caught between these major currents. You get this big circular motion where sargassum prospers, but it also prospers in parts of the Gulf of Mexico, in the center of the Gulf, gets transported with the Gulf Stream, and in the Caribbean. And just in the last few years, these extraordinary blooms, we don't really know whether such blooms happened 500 years ago, 200 years ago. Who was watching? There was no tourism people weren't living there. And those who were living in some of these places weren't reporting what they saw. There's no record of, there's this avalanche of sargassum on the beach. Actually, I do recall as a kid, Clearwater Beach times, when this massive, windrows of sargassum would come ashore. Not at the scale that has happened just in the last 4 or 5 years, but there have been times when, whether it's storm action or some fertilization event, dust coming from Africa, creating a little push in terms of nitrogen in the water that fosters the growth of phytoplankton as well as sargassum. I wish I had a straight answer. I'm just kind of giving some of the insight that we're getting, thinking, asking the question you're asking: where did it come? How is it that there's so much? Until this recent explosion of sargassum, I advised those who have hotels on the beaches to welcome the sargassum, bring it ashore. Don't rake it up and leave it, because those are nutrients coming from the sea that historically have brought what is needed for the land plants to get those trace elements that they need. And they also help hold the sand in place. It's part of the natural system. And raking it up and disposing of sargassum seemed to me to be the most, you know, foolish thing ever. That you should get kids out there with a magnifying glass and explore the forest that's just come ashore. Look at the little sargassum fish and little shrimp and the little flying fish and try to get them back in the ocean where they belong. But too much of a good thing is a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I've seen the images, and I've actually been down in Antigua when they had this massive avalanche of sargassum beyond what has been considered normal in the past. So, but I think we're looking at the ocean chemistry is changing through what we're putting in, through what we're taking out. And some creatures are favored and some are not. And what we're seeing is a disrupted system.
Yeah,
So,
but speaking of things being put in that don't belong there, but also just the disruption. Monica Arnold has a question about the Deepwater Horizon tragedy
yeah,
and wanted to know, um, did the ocean recover from the deep horizon, and or are there lasting problems from the oil that poured into the ocean in that crisis?
the answer is yes and yes. Um, it recovery, nature is resilient, but there's a lasting impact, and there's a lot of toxic material that will be a lasting legacy, and not just that which has managed to get to the bottom of the ocean. It's incorporated into the food chain, into the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, in the little fish, the big fish. It's a part of their chemistry now, too. Just as all of us on the planet right now have within our bodies chemicals that did not exist going back when my parents were kids. They're now in us. We can't avoid it. They're in the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat. So we're still walking around. In fact, our overall longevity is greater, probably not because of the changing chemistry, because of other things that we're learning, how to live longer and eat better and be healthier. But, we have compromised ourselves, and we're now compromising creatures in the sea. And it isn't just the oil spills, it's also the detergents that we applied to try to sink the oil, disperse the oil, make it into smaller little pieces so that it looks better, but it doesn't go away. It's still there, now complicated because you've added toxic detergents to the toxic oil. And a little bit of oil is part of the natural system, but again, a lot of oil is a real problem for many creatures. And we are now still seeing evidence of the Exxon Valdez. If you dig down in those pebbles along the beaches, Virginia, that back in
Sure.
1989, the oil is still there. In the Persian Gulf, the surface, it looks fine. If you dig down into the marsh, you go down a couple of feet, and there's still, it's like there's a layer there that marks that piece of time. It's there. It's a signature of our behavior. And so nature is resilient, but not infinitely so. We don't know when we've pushed to the point where it doesn't come back. It just keeps going in the wrong direction. That's what we face right now overall. People are saying, what do we do to recover from the decline? Climate scientists say we have maybe 10 years to look at the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to safeguard the wild systems, land and sea, that capture the carbon and keep the planet steady while we figure out how to reduce what we're putting into the atmosphere in the first place. And, lucky us, We know the questions to ask, and you're asking them. Tell
Mm.
me about the Gulf of Mexico. I want to know. And there are answers because scientists have been down there in submersibles. They've been down there remote cameras and sampling devices. It's not a mystery. You can sample the water. It's different today than it was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
The composition of life is different because some creatures have been diminished because of what we've either killed with toxins or what we've taken out deliberately. But now we know. What are we going to do about it?
Speaking about what to do about it, so we have a question from our Commodore, Liz Filter, um,
Great.
which is, thank you so very much for this presentation. My father was involved with the Ben Franklin project and the
Oh,
Sea Dragon under the North Pole back in 1960s. So
right.
this is near and dear to my heart. What can the average citizen do to affect change? It seems so daunting, especially in this political climate.
I think what every one of us should do is look in the mirror and assess for yourself what your power is. What do you do that is special to you that nobody else, everybody has something that makes you you? I love Mr. Rogers. You're special, you know? Everybody has something that sets them apart. Use that power coupled with that all cross-cutting superpower that exists today that didn't exist huh, anytime in the past. We're armed with knowledge. Look at the evidence and question just as a child would, just as a scientist always does. And if you find that you're wrong about something, instead of saying, oh, I don't want anybody to know I was wrong, say, yes, now I know. Now I understand. Scientists revel in learning that they were wrong because they get closer to the truth. And that's what we're all should be striving to do. How do we get from where we are to a better place? You look at the evidence, you look at the cause and effect, and you listen to those who know more about something than you do. And even then, you should ask those who are experts at whatever, ask them how they know what they know. And if they can't answer, question them again. You know, it's how we progress. Asking questions, making mistakes, correcting our mistakes, and moving forward. Looking at the evidence, using our power, and looking at the past. Problems have been solved over the past if we can mine the history and not have to make the same stupid mistakes all over again. That gives us an edge. That's our gift of learning from the past and applying it to the future. So I think this is the best chance we will ever have right now to take what we know with the incentive that is really powerful. We've got a chance to get it right and not a lot of time. And we do have time to change the trajectory from this time of despair that you see all around. You know, we have poverty, wars, obviously disease, and the decline of the natural world. But it isn't too late. We're still breathing carefully, but you know, we know what to do. We really do know what to do. We have to take care of the natural world and of one another as if our lives depend on it, because they do.
Using our own power, our own skills. Yeah,
Superpower.
superpower. We have had regarding that the future and superpower as in inspiring folks to take action. Debbie Dillon wants to know, what advice do you have for young marine scientists who are just getting a start in the field?
Be glad that you're jumping in right now. It's daunting in some ways because what you would say, call it competition, if you will. There are a lot of people who are aspiring to try to get into places whether it's universities or positions where they can exercise their passion, but to be the very best you can be at something that you care about and really make it your own, and find those who are kindred spirits. Find mentors, somebody who will kind of look after you, who believes in you, whether it's a parent or a teacher, a friend. It really helps to have somebody else at your side to say, I'll open a door for you, or I'll push you through the door if you're a little reluctant. Just go for it.
Okay.
Even if you don't have someone there to sort of egg you on, that person you see in the mirror is the most important friend, yourself. Your confidence. You've got one chunk of time. You know, it's life is a gift. To not let it slide by without giving it your best shot.
Speaking of life being a gift, one of the questions we have, uh, by the way, is from one from Catherine Cronin and also from Sue. Sue R. Catherine said she began scuba diving a few years ago, and it was a bit of a challenge for her because she was in her 60s. But she absolutely fell in love with it, and it totally changed her life. She strongly encourages everyone to get underwater. But one of the questions from Sue, her friend Sue R, is how have all those hours underwater affected you physically? How's your health? You're still going strong, for God's sake. It's pretty impressive, Sylvia.
Well, one of the great things about swimming, diving, in the ocean, work with the water. The water holds you up. It's great exercise. And there's always something in the ocean, even in freshwater, outside of a pool. Pools are kind of boring. You can look at the drain or look at people who are swimming by, but anything out in a lake or river or pond, and certainly in the ocean, there's something always engaging. And it's, I think exercising your mind as well as your body is a key to good health. And that sense of curiosity, of wanting to know, and never being bored. I don't see how anybody can possibly say I'm bored when the world is so full of questions that nobody has answers to yet. And even if there are answers, maybe you don't know what they are. Go out there and maybe you have a different take on it. I think that it should be what diving can be whatever you want it to be. It can be macho, jump in and risk your life, hitting cold water and big waves, go deep, whatever. But it can be just the most relaxing, fulfilling kind of experience. Choose your dives, know yourself, and I've been on the board of DAN, the Divers Alert Network, for years. I've done 2 terms out on the board. They look at diving safety, and you get to hear all these terrible statistics about accidents. But overall, people can trip over the doorstep and break their leg. It just, when you embrace the ocean, do so with respect, do so with care, do so as you would any other thing that you do, whether it's horseback riding or getting into a car. Know what the rules are. And if you respect what the limits are, I say diving is a lifetime enterprise. Those kids who are starting to dive now, it depends. No 2 people are alike, but there are kids who are actually safely under the guidance of an adult, 8, 9, 10 years old, getting into the ocean. They're not certified, but they're under the watchful eye of someone who's right there giving them some guidance. And if you're concerned about, running out of steam, if you're in your 70s or 80s, okay, go with someone who can be there as your buddy. You should go with a buddy anyway. And there's no reason why this can't be something you do for your whole life. I have a date with Jean-Michel Cousteau. We've talked about this for at least 10 years. I'm gonna celebrate my 100th birthday diving with him. We've got a date. We might even have an underwater cake, but no candles.
And for everyone to share with everyone, because you want to share your age, you just had a birthday.
Oh,
It was a
well,
great celebration, by the way.
8 decades plus 5.
And you're still going strong. Your last dive was obviously just right before COVID lockdown.
That's right, in the Seychelles in
Yeah,
February.
right. So I think your point is
My last dive,
all those
only
hours underwater haven't affected you negatively. If anything, they've affected you positively, right? That's the moral of the story.
the ocean is open.
Yeah. We also have a question from Jack Detweiler. In the Chesapeake Bay, we have constantly been killing the 20-year striped bass and calling it trophy season. And now that the striped bass is in steep decline and Maryland is not doing anything about it. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that? And he also asked, Ben, I hate to put you on the spot, but he asked if Ben grumbles at any comment either. But it is a challenge here in the Bay, fishing and overfishing. But any thoughts in terms of that question? The older 20-year striped bass that's
There was a time, you might remember, Virginia, again, when we were at NOAA, when we were celebrating the 5-year moratorium that brought the striped bass back from the edge of being wiped out. Same thing, the decline. So a moratorium, we stopped killing them. Amazing. Then they started to recover. But you can get to the point where they can't recover. You have too few, especially of the big old fish that are most important in making the little fish. So if I were the big boss, I'd say just stop killing them for a while. And maybe they will come back. And maybe if you're careful, we can take some. But we got careless again, even though we had evidence that if we're relentless in taking them, and if we don't have, you have to, here's my advice. Think like a striped bass. All right. This is when I talk to fishermen, I say, look, you got to think like the fish. If you're the fish and you wanted people to make the rules, what would you advise them? If you're a duck, what would you tell the duck hunters? You'd say, you've got to protect the breeding areas. You've got to protect the feeding areas. You have to protect the nurseries. Don't go there. I don't know, I'm just talking seasons. I'm talking lockdown. You can go there and look at us and, wave at us, but don't eat us, don't kill us. And if we were really serious about having fish to take home to eat, we would be serious about not taking too many, leave the big ones, and make sure that you have places where they can do their thing to recover. And maybe you have to just put a full stop for a while, the way happened some years ago, because guess what? It worked. It worked. Maybe it can work again. When you see this happening, you ought to say, every fish counts. I'm going to put this one back, or I'm not going to even go there.
Yeah.
I'm going to try eating something else. I'll be an adventurer. I'll try something else. I'll be creative in terms of my culinary experiences.
Well, we have one other question that the questions keep coming in, so we're going to have to start to wrap up here. But I'm going to tie a couple of questions here together. John, and I'll just kind of phrase them all at once because I think you are addressing several of the points in your comments, I'm sure. John Butler is asking about your view on sustainable seafood. And you talked a bit about that, but his question is, where does aquaculture fit in to that? And related to that question, we also have a query from Susan Callis with NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service, and she knows NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service is helping to police overfishing, aren't they? Question, I mean, are we really trying to address this question through the National Marine Fisheries Service and our fisheries management councils?
Well, I would strongly urge all of us everywhere to recognize that, yes, we have a traditional way of looking at life in the ocean primarily as food or as products or whatever. We need to balance that with looking at a new way of looking at life in the ocean now that we know what we know that we could not know not so long ago. We have laws in place that make it legal to take from the ocean on a scale that is beyond what the ocean can continue to deliver. We have the evidence because whatever it is we've been doing, our attempts to manage the ocean, really manage ourselves. We're not going to manage nature. The laws of nature will do what the laws of nature will do. We need to put laws on our behavior, but they have to reflect the reality. And we have inherited policies, procedures, habits, even tastes from a time that was when the ocean was a different place. We have seen, I have witnessed, a loss of resilience in the ocean, a decline of basic creatures that make the ocean a healthy place, governing the nitrates, the phosphates, the carbon, the generating the nutrients. Whales deliver a big topic of conversation at the World Economic Forum about whale poop. Whale poop, fertilizer, going back into the ocean to fertilize the phytoplankton that captures carbon, generates oxygen. Well, striped bass do the same thing. So do tuna, so do lobsters, so do all forms of life. It's this web of life in this minestrone that's out there in the sea that we have changed the chemistry. We've shifted the odds when it used to be that we had to really help the fishermen find the fish because there were so many places in the ocean where fish could be, secure, if you will, out of lots of places for the fish to hide. Okay, in the last 50 years, technologies have made it impossible for fish to have a place to hide. We have sonar that enables us to see where the fish are and to deploy our newly enhanced techniques to find and capture essentially all of them if we want to. The only reason we haven't is that there are some restraints, but we could essentially take them all. If we wanted to kill every last tuna, we have the technology that makes that possible. The only thing that will enable tuna to be in the sea is for us to manage ourselves in a way that says fish alive, tuna alive, stripers alive, crabs alive, oysters alive have a place on the planet too. And we know how to kill them, and we got to do a better job of taking care of them. It doesn't mean that we won't always eat some, but we have just gone overboard, literally, with extravagant expectations from a much diminished system. We have to be realistic about how much we can take, how much we must safeguard for all the reasons, not just so we can enjoy striped bass with however you like to have it cooked, but so that striped bass are out there making the ocean a healthy place, making the atmosphere a healthy place, making the planet, doing their bit to make the planet a healthy place. Live fish, not just dead fish. Our focus has been how many fish can we kill? I think our focus has to shift. How many can we let live and still have a planet, still have some to take? But we've got to be more generous in terms of what we leave
Yeah.
to
And
reproduce.
related to that, do you think aquaculture is one of,
I'm
well,
sorry, aquaculture. Yeah.
it would fit in as well to help
You
address
know,
that issue? Because it helps
again,
address the demand for oysters, the demand for.
we can look at the history. What do we grow from the land? How many lions and tigers do we grow commercially? Well, there are some that are being taken for reasons that have nothing to do with food, but for medicinal, traditional medicine in Asia. You raise tigers so you can have their bones. You raise tigers so you can have their skin. But I'm talking about predators. Most of the fish that are being cultivated today, salmon, are predators. They're top predators. So you take this many fish out of the ocean to send this many fish to market. It's really kind of a stupid business model, except the only reason it works, these fish are free. They have a zero accounting base. The live fish in the ocean, just they, you don't subtract anything out of the big balance sheet from this ocean when you take them out, because we have our accounting system. Uh, we only are looking at a piece of the balance sheet. So it's not a workable model if you put the value of the fish as living systems that are taken to feed the top predators. We have to think differently about the value of what we take out of the ocean. It's going to take a while, but the truth will come out. I mean, it is coming out right now because you see a collapse of these wild populations. You see squid being depleted. You see the little fish like menhaden compared to what it was. Why? You can blame the seals, you can blame the birds, you can blame the other fish, but actually you need to look in the mirror. We have taken so much so fast that we have gone beyond what is, quote, sustainable. And
But wouldn't aquaculture help address that? Is the question.
there's a way to learn from what works on the land, raising plant eating animals for us to consume, eating plant eating fish for us to consume. The first question to ask is, are you trying to look at food security or are you looking at choice? People choose to eat salmon, except for those who have a long history of taking wild salmon. That's food security. The native people, it's a different thing, but eating either wild salmon or cultivated salmon far from where salmon live is a choice. It's not a necessity. It's not food security. And so aquaculture that in closed systems probably has the best chance of being a real alternative to having
Farming.
having aquatic creatures on our menu in the long pull. And it's not the wide range of animals that we now take, wild animals from far around in different parts of the planet, but to choose, as we have, a dozen or so kinds of animals that we cultivate. You know, chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, lamb, beef, um, pigs. But how many mammals are there? How many different kinds of birds are there? How many are we cultivating to eat? The others are probably tasty, but we don't have the habit. Well, we used to, but we've gotten away from eating blackbirds, 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie. We've changed our habits in keeping with reality. We will eventually have to change our habits in keeping with the reality of wildlife from the sea and cultivate those creatures that, whether it's a matter of choice, because we like to eat them, not because we It's food security. It's a food choice. I mean, we've been trying to figure out how do you raise lobsters in captivity. It's really tricky. It's not the best choice of something to raise. Their life history is really complicated. And so it's not food security to try to cultivate lobsters. And so, but it is food security to cultivate carp. Asian countries have been doing this, especially China, for thousands of years. They, like chicken, convert efficiently sunlight plants, about 2 pounds of plants to make a pound of carp, and they could do it within a year or maybe 2 years, but not 10 years, not 20 years, not like the wild fish that are 20, 30. A shark takes 20 years just to mature. What are we doing killing sharks for, for shark steak? Um, it takes 6, 8, 10 years for bluefin tuna to mature. So, what are we thinking? Trying to make that a stable thing for our diet. It's a learned behavior, a learned taste that is relatively new in the 20th century, except for a few island countries and history. People in Japan have consumed tuna for a while, longer than in Chicago or New York or San Francisco, you know. But
Mhm.
anyway, aquaculture has a future, but it's going to have a short existence if we expect to take large numbers of wild animals to feed to small numbers of cultivated animals. That is the big mistake that is currently
Being done.
overarching aquaculture. Or to take, I'm not in favor of open ocean aquaculture, although I know NOAA is now supporting this because, again, we aren't accounting for the cost. We think of the ocean as free real estate. It's not. It's not free. We're displacing the the living ocean when we put a farm out in the ocean. We're not accounting for it properly. It's not. I don't know what it takes to get people to think like the ocean, to think like a planet, to think like a fish, if you will, and to think about the real cost of our appetite
Mhm.
and the finding, the catching, the marketing of wildlife from the sea is a big number. And this country, as well as around the world, there are subsidies that make it realistic for fishermen to continue operating on a scale that would not be realistic if if they did not have access to markets that are facilitated or knowledge that is facilitated as a gift or the outright subsidies in terms of what governments around the world, we're talking billions of dollars of subsidies that are invested in keeping the industrial fishing operations that are, when you look at the whole picture, it's undercutting the capacity of the local fishers, the communities, to have the capacity to stay in business. And yes, some species lend themselves more readily to aquaculture than others. And although I personally am not a big fan of these open ocean systems, sort of taking from the global commons to benefit those who are extracting the value out of the ocean, the idea of restoring oysters, putting back into the ocean, how can I fault that? I think that's a good thing. Um, and maybe when their populations not only get strong enough, but when you can trust what the oysters have been eating, that it's okay for you to eat them because the water now is cleaner and better, that they're healthier, so you can not be worried about consuming something that's been consuming what's been put into the ocean. You know, I think being taking advantage of what we know and not being afraid to say, you know, I, I was wrong. And I need to rethink the way I go about whatever it is I'm doing. Like, it's a way to get from where we are to get to a better place. And
Well, speaking
right,
about getting to a better place, I want to ask you to give some final thoughts because I think we need to wrap this up. But I just wanted to give you a chance to give some final thoughts of how we can get to that better place, and just some kind of closing thoughts so we can.
we all have things that hold our attention day to day: our family, our health, our security, personally, and then we can look around the world and realize there are problems, and each of us has capacity to do something about some piece of that. But right at the top of the list, above everything else, if we fail to take care of the natural systems that capture the carbon, deliver oxygen, maintain the integrity of the diversity of life that set this planet apart from every other place in the universe, we're not going to make it. We all have to do whatever we can. Our highest priority must be to take care of the natural world, whether it's in your backyard, to give bees a break, to, if you have a lawn, consider planting wildflowers, consider putting a little patch of broccoli in your backyard. Or I've got some artichokes growing here in California. I eat some, but I let some stay for the bees. Oh my goodness, the bees are so happy when the artichokes turn into these big blue flowers. It's like bee heaven, and makes me happy. I eat the artichokes, but I leave some for them, for the for the my neighbors, if you will, with little wings that go around pollinating the gardens everywhere. What can you do? I can't tell you precisely what any of you can do, but I do suggest that you can tell yourself. Identify the problems, but make a headline. What can you do every day to restore health to the planet? Whether it's in your backyard, whether it's supporting an organization that is doing something like the Hope Spots, the Audubon Society, Nature Conservancy, you know, Conservation International, World Wildlife Fund. There's a long list of organizations, and use the assets that we pay good taxpayer funding. Look at NOAA's amazing network of information, the Weather Service, satellites. Tune in, be your own, wellspring of knowledge. And whether you're in school or out of school, never stop learning. This is our gift. Elephants are smart, but they cannot do what kids can do. I look at the whales and dolphins and I think, oh, I wish I could do what you do, but I can do things that no other creature on the planet, just humans, have the capacity to connect the way we do globally. Now, picking up our little pieces of equipment that can connect us to people all over the world and share the problems and share the solutions. Best time ever to be alive. Thank you, Virginia. Thank you, all of you, for letting me be a part of your day.
Thank you so much. I'm going to applaud for everyone because I know you can't see us all, but everyone so enjoyed your presentation. Thank you, Sylvia Earle. We really appreciate your time tonight and what a difference you've made for the world and for all of us as we take home and reflect on your thoughts tonight and find that power within us. All right.
Underwater.
Okay, we'll see you underwater. And thank you all for joining us. And we will be having a lecture every month through the fall. And thank you again, Dr. Earle, for kicking it off this season. We really appreciate it. Take care and good night to everyone.